We're live.
Thank you. Do we have a quorum?
We do, Lawrence. You're good. You do have quorum.
Okay, then let us start. Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee of the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, which is being live streamed on YouTube. If you want the URL, it will be www.youtube.com/TSHC-livestreams/streams. In addition to the participating board members and the leadership team, I am pleased to welcome our virtual audience and thank you for joining us. I want to thank Grant, Vince, and their team for the preparation of the materials brought forward for today's meeting. Today, we will be reviewing 2024 work plan for this committee, 2024 combined budget that was proposed by the staff, financial update, and approval of policies related to delegation of authority and capital expenses policy. Let us begin with the land and African ancestral acknowledgement. Though we may be meeting virtually in different locations, as a committee of a City of Toronto Corporation, we honor the land we are on, which has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. It is the traditional territories of Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nations. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements and is home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. The committee also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. These treaties and other agreements, including the One Dish with One Spoon, One Pump Belt Covenant, are agreements to peaceably share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. We are mindful of broken covenants, and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation or generations past. We would also like to acknowledge those who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade.
You close that door, please.
Therefore, we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. Well, the next item on the agenda is approval of the public meeting agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? If there is none, I need a mover and a seconder.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Warren, and I need a seconder. Seconded by Brenda. All in favor? Carried. Next is the conflict of interest declaration. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Having heard none, let us move to the next item. That's the approval of the FRC public session minutes of the meeting held on November 28, 2023.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and I need a seconder. Seconded by Brenda. All in favor? Carried. Next will be the approval of the FRC closed session minutes of the meeting held on November 28. I have I'm seeing here, just give me a second, on page 5, other items, it says a detailed discussion took place regarding the recommendations made by the chair that budget meetings be held in the public session for transparency purposes. It was recommended in our quest to have tenant engagement, it might be worthwhile to hold an information session to inform tenant leaders of the budget process and the financial cost pressures, Actually, I had also talked about the public participation that is missing here. Would it be possible to include it? And subject to that, we can approve it? Or will it be brought forward in the next meeting?
Lawrence noticed that too, and I didn't think it quite reflected what we discussed, so I
Yeah,
think that's a wise change or amendment to the minutes or whatever the appropriate step is.
yeah. It addresses the transparency, but public
That's right.
participation. It doesn't say anything here.
That's right.
Lawrence, if I could,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
what we could do is that we could amend the minutes based on this conversation and make sure that we
Mhm.
include, I think, probably just an enhancement to that sentence in the draft of the minutes. And
Okay.
then, and if you can just repeat what you'd like added, just want to make sure we captured properly. And then,
Yeah.
and then if you can then hold the vote with the amended minutes to be adopted.
Okay, basically, I had said, the second point, what I had said is not only transparency, I was basically advocating for public participation as well. The second point. This is a page 5.
I'm looking at the bullet on my other screen. I'm not going to bring it
Yeah.
up because it's part of the in-camera package. But
Okay.
what we'll do is, if you're comfortable with, it was recommended in our quest to have tenant engagement, it might be worthwhile to hold an information session
Mhm.
to inform tenant leaders and consider tenant public participation
Okay.
and public participation in the budget process.
Yeah.
I think-
Brenda,
I th-
are you comfortable with that?
No, because I think there's two separate points here. There's one here about informing tenant leaders, and I assume that's the folks that are engaged in our engagement process. So having an information session, I think, for that group is also a good point. And then I would make a separate point,
Mhm.
even a separate bullet point, frankly, because you're talking about transparency and public accountability. I'd make it as a separate bullet point. And I would suggest that it's the language we would use.
If I might, if it might assist.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So what we'll do is we'll look to make it a separate bullet point.
yeah,
And we will go back and re-listen to that meeting to make sure that we capture that accurately, because these are the
Mhm.
minutes from that meeting. So I want to make sure we're capturing it as discussed in the meeting, not
Yeah.
trying, I know we might not remember the exact language right now, but in the
Yeah.
spirit of where we're going.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
with that change for a separate bullet point on being more specific about public participation in the process, which I think is what you're getting at, Lawrence.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I was
do-
basically, I might not have said this specifically in that last meeting, but basically what I was trying, the city says we are guided by 4 principles: transparency, participation, accountability, and accessibility. It's boldly written on the city's website. So I was
Yes.
basically trying to advocate for that. Thank you.
And
So we
also-
can bring it.
Yeah, I think also we need to be cognizant of the fact that I don't think any of the board member had any concern with taking the budget public and meeting those principles that you just articulated. I think we also expressed the view, and again, if we want the minutes to be comprehensive, we need to reflect the view that we basically indicated that we were going to follow whatever direction we receive from the City of Toronto and be consistent with that as well. So if you go back and look and re-listen to the minutes, Grant, you'll find that that point was made as well.
Yes, and I think, Lawrence, you had said
Yeah.
that you had mentioned about how you looked at other city agencies,
Yeah,
boards,
yeah.
and commissions.
I was looking at
we are being consistent. So I think whatever manner they use to inform people, I mean, we can be consistent with that. But
I was looking into, Toronto, City of Toronto Act, Section 19 and the policies, and I was saying even those corporations or boards which I mean, to which they are not applicable, even they were holding the meetings consistently throughout the process, starting with the first one, the subsequent changes or reviews, everything was in the open. So whereas we were not. That's what I was trying to say.
yeah.
Okay, so if it can be brought forward in the next meeting for approval.
And
Yeah.
just one other point, Lawrence,
Mhm.
I think we've missed the point here in terms of timeliness. We talked about holding an information to inform our
Mhm.
tenant leaders of the budget process. Well, that's gone. I mean, it's going to be voted on February 14th in council, but I think executive committee voted this week or something. So we might have missed the boat on that piece, but I still think we could hold an information session
Yeah,
just to
after the
inform
fact,
them.
yeah. Mhm. Okay, Jill, I see your hand up.
So if I could, I know we want to bring this item to a close.
Oh,
Just to
can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear
Can
me?
hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, so we will, and it's a valid point, Brenda, that you make. In this year's budget cycle, we've obviously passed some of the key dates. But to clarify, our staff followed the direction given by the city as it related to sharing the information publicly. And it actually was only in the last most recent communication to our committee that we realized that TCHC had shared it at one of their committees and had not really shared that with us. So it was a little bit unplanned on our part as well. So we will make sure that as the budget proceeds on the 14th for approval at council, that we talk about options of sharing the outcome of the budget process for 2024 with our tenant representatives for sure. And then going into 2025, we will follow a different process when the timing makes sense, that we have both tenant-related public sessions around content as well as consultations and sharing of information. So we will definitely take a different approach for 2025.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's informative, you know, I mean, you always learn something new through this, and it gives a little reality check too, you know, always.
Absolutely. And again, as everyone knows, we still are presenting a shared budget with TCHC as well. So we're in a bit of a unique circumstance in terms of coordinating all of that. So anyways, we will endeavor to do differently going forward.
Thank you. Shall we move to item number 7 in that case? That's the AFRC action items review. Vince or Grant?
Well, how about I speak to it briefly, and then there are a couple items on there. So there were 4 action items on the list, 1 from the September 28th meeting and 3 from November 28th. Of the 4 actions on there, 1 was completed, that Vince completed. 1 is upcoming, which is around the emergency procedures. Our plan is to bring that to the next AFRC meeting. That'll be in early April, and we're working on that right now. And then there were 2 other items that Vince is working on that are in progress. If there are specific questions about that, we could have Vince address them now, or if that is sufficient, we can move on.
Yeah, Brenda?
Yeah, I had originally raised this, I believe, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. I was kind of expecting an answer by now. I just wanted to know what are our plans in general. I didn't need huge specifics, but just so we as board members are informed of what procedures we might have or what missing gaps there might be. So this could include emergency procedures related to environmental issues, you know, if we have problems with electricity, water, extreme climate events. And I did think one of you folks said you do have procedures in place or policy manual in place for some of these things already. So I didn't want it, you know, a big thing here. I was just wanting some general information so we as board members are informed. For example, the recent IT breach that occurred, you know, what do we have as our plans for dealing with those things? And if there are plans that are not yet developed, that's fine, but we need to know that as board members just so we can do our due diligence.
Yeah, I see Grant and Jill. Grant, please go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you wanted to go first, Jill.
Actually, I'll defer to you, Grant. You go ahead.
Thank you. So through the chair. So the intent on our response on this one, there is an emergency response plan that exists that has been developed and has been in place. It's a very detailed plan. And there are some other components around emergency response. And our goal here was to put a summary together for the board, or sorry, for the committee, and to bring that forward for a discussion in a more in-depth way. And at the same time, we actually are working through an update to that plan in collaboration with TCHC right now too.
Oh, good.
So there's a number of pieces in that particular space that we'd like to work on and then bring forward for the information of the committee. And our plan was to do it at the next meeting.
Okay. Does that include environmental issues as
To
well?
a certain degree, it's not an overall risk assessment sort of view for the corporation. It's more about a specific plan about how we deal with emergency situations. So, you know, fires, elevator outages, floods, that kind of stuff. So there is sort of a climate kind of angle to it potentially, but it's not meant to address climate issues. It's more about how we actually address tenants and resolving and you know, different types of incidents. So, you know, small to large incidents, how it will be managed, who would do what, and how we'd ensure that there was some support for tenants in all those processes. So that's what that emergency response plan is.
Okay.
It does get into broader type emergency scenarios as well. That could include the city and other kind of larger scale events and how they might be, how they would be dealt with in that plan. So it's a pretty complex, or I wouldn't say complex, but it's comprehensive in that context. So we want to share that and walk that through at this committee as part of the risk component of this committee's mandate. Later in the year, we're going to bring forward, and I'm going to talk about the plan in a few moments for the year for AFRC and get feedback. You'll see there's a further risk assessment piece that the environmental components you're talking about will be brought into view more clearly.
So we call that risk management or risk assessment? What's the phrase we use?
So we're going to also be doing an enterprise risk assessment, so policy and risk assessment, and then a plan associated with that. And that's another piece of work. And I'll talk to that in a sec. And it's on another item coming up.
Great. I understood that TCHC did have a staff person, if not persons, that directly is dealing with environmental, you know, renewal and the plan for the future. So I didn't know whether we were piggybacking onto that or not.
We can take that back as an action through the chair, Brenda. I'm not aware of that particular.
Yeah, I just met him.
Maybe,
So
maybe
that's why.
Brad. There is an environmental health unit.
Yes.
And the environmental health unit is more focused on environmental health in buildings and units with tenants and pest control to a certain degree on the broader scale, environmental health with air quality, things like that. But Brad, I see his hand is up, so he'll probably have some more info here.
Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, through the chair. Brenda, the buildings still are owned by TCHC. So as part of the capital planning process
That's right.
that we undergo with them, we do look at those things. We receive monthly reports with regards to our waste pickup and how to reduce costs in that, lowering our green footprint, retrofits for LED lighting, low flow toilets, things like that. And that's something that we work with the TCHC capital planning department on, and is currently being delivered all year round.
Okay, thank you. It's as I noticed for a lot of corporations and public corporations, we're being asked increasingly for our understanding and what are we doing for due diligence on these larger environmental matters, and I just think it'd be cognizant of us to do the same sort of thing, whether we piggyback onto TCH or, you know, obviously we'll have to do that with them, but because they do own the buildings.
You know, you might have read in the front line, I mean, the front page item, news item today, City of Sudbury paid $1.5 million.
Yes, I saw that.
That's a bank transfer.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And seemingly done very easily. That was the shocking thing if you read the article. It's
you know, with the AI coming in.
That's right.
Vince, would you like to talk about the subsequent two items on the action item?
Yeah, certainly through the chair. Yeah, so with respect to the two items that was raised on the November 28th meeting, we are working with TCHC to you know, do the booking moving forward on the surplus on a quarterly basis, as was discussed going forward. And that was item number 3, and so that is an item that we have on our agenda to be speaking to TCHC to be ensure that we have the more information, more detail, and then we can book that entry moving forward. So hopefully I would say by Q2, we should have some more updates in terms of that information. With respect to the item number 2, In terms of the surplus, it is still in progress right now because the tricky part of the current arrangement with TCHC is that just due to the nature of the advances and the settlement, there potentially, will be some issues with as respect to surplus for the current year. However, we anticipate that it will be at a deficit situation. So I don't anticipate that there will be a surplus. However, we are reviewing and ensuring that if we are coming across any sort of surplus situation, we will identify and discuss with our council in terms of what is the next step in terms of how that is approached. But as it stands right now, we don't anticipate that there will be a surplus, and more likely it will be a small deficit between now and, I would say, by beginning of March, we would know what the result would be. If anything, we might even know a bit sooner, probably within the next 2-3 weeks, when TCC and TSHC will finalize the reconciliation process. Yeah.
Thanks, Vince.
Do we have a policy about surplus? Does it always go to TCHC unless negotiated otherwise?
Through the chair, the first year, the surplus says that it goes to TCHC, but any subsequent years, the surplus should remain with TSHC. So that was in the transition agreement, and that was outlined there. But through the arrangement with currently with the city on some of the advances, I would say there's still room for interpretations, and I think we would best to go through council just to make sure that they read that more correctly and provide us with their input.
Yeah, thank you. If there are no further questions on that, we can move to the next item. Item number 8. This is a proposed work plan for 2024 for this committee. Grant?
Thank you, Lawrence, through the chair. And if I can ask Liz or Fatima to bring up the work plan, I'll just quickly walk the committee through it. Thank you. So as committee members may recall, at the beginning of last year, and for each of the 3 committees, we did develop a view of the proposed topics for each of the meetings throughout the year. Of course, this is a plan, and it is subject to, at times there may be changes in certain items or other items that would be included that aren't here yet, but this is a high-level view of what we're looking at. You'll see there are 6 meetings for AFRC this year. And the quarters and the topics are there. I won't go into significant detail on this, but it's intended to give us a perspective as to what will be coming when. You'll see the budget, for example, in the second half of the year, the audit in the earlier part of the year, some of the stuff that we just discussed around the emergency management, and later on the enterprise risk management framework and plan, and regular updates from a financial perspective, for example, and a potential update on the transition and lease agreement in Q2. So this is a plan that we present to the committee today to work from as we move forward, and we'll work together with the committee and with Lawrence as chair on this. And one of the other things we've done this year with the plan is indicated it with the asterisk against the items, which items will move forward to board, and for the items as they move forward from committee. So I'll take any questions on this. And Vince has had a lot of input into this as well, so we developed this together.
Any questions? Yeah, Brenda, go ahead.
The Q2, June 12th, the update on transition lease agreement. You're talking about our final agreement we're supposed to have with Toronto Community Housing. Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. We call it transition lease agreement. I thought it was.
Well, right now, just through the chair. So right now we have a transition agreement in place, service delivery agreement in place. And the intent was to have a lease agreement in place, which would replace the transition agreement. So that update that's noted for that date would be an update on the status of the transition agreement and the plan to move to a lease.
So the lease agreement seems fairly narrow, though. I mean, isn't there supposed to be some sort of agreement as to our interlocking relationships? And I'm not certain what's covered under lease agreement.
So that the intent, and it's a good question, Brenda. So in the original conversations when TSHC was set up,
Yes,
and the negotiation on the agreements took place, there was initially work done to move towards a lease agreement, and then there were some impediments that were
right,
surfaced with regards to that direction. So it was shifted into a transition agreement meant to be a temporary agreement
right,
arrangement
right,
between the corporations. That ultimately, once the impediments were addressed, and they were primarily around technology and financial systems, once
right.
those impediments were addressed, that we'd be in a position to adopt a lease agreement. And the current transition agreement and service delivery agreement were both brought through the board, committee and board at the time. So
Right.
they're still in effect. So the intent, though, would be to move to a lease agreement, which would give a different but similar arrangement, but different authority for TSHC in the context of our working relationship with TCHC. So that's what this report would be on the June meeting, is to actually give more information about where we are with regards to this, and potentially some of the options we might be considering going forward.
Okay, so lease agreement covers more than just the simple matter that you pay this bill on this date. It also details our working relationship and our reporting relationship.
It would detail the arrangement between the two corporations in a different context in terms of the way that we have the arrangement with regards to how we would, for example, we don't collect the rent today. The rent is collected through TCHC and flows to us. Under a lease agreement, we would be in charge of collecting the rent and the revenue from that.
Okay.
So there would be some changes with regards to roles and responsibilities as well.
Yes.
We would officially be able to enter into an operating agreement with the City of Toronto, as an example, which we can't today. So
Yes.
there are
Yes.
some
Okay.
constraints in our ability to operate as an independent organization in the current arrangement.
That's right.
And so it was always envisioned that we would move towards a lease, but there have been different factors that have influenced sort of the work on this over the last year and a half since transition. And we want to be more structured and formally bring back an update, because we know this has been discussed at committee and board here.
All right, thank you, because we're now getting into what, third year? It still hasn't been addressed or resolved, so.
So originally the intent was that we would hopefully have been in a position to move into a lease agreement for 2023, but the impediments that need to be addressed to get there needed some significant resources and time to address, and that did not happen in 2023. And so at this point, there are different options about the timing and considerations that we would analyze and bring forward some of that for this June discussion we proposed.
You're being very generous and careful in your description of this. I think I would use stronger language, of course, which I can do as a non-employee of the corporation. But I think the dragging of the heels here, the things have been resolved and discussed ad infinitum, and I think my support and direction to staff and to the chair is really, this has got to be wound up soon, because we're now getting to year 3. I think that's enough time to have resolved so-called impediments, and I think it's heel dragging, foot dragging. Sorry, I mixed my metaphors. And now we're into June, so that will be 3 years, exactly 3 years.
So through the chair, I'll just maybe just add this, that I think we acknowledge that there's certainly an interest on behalf of TSHC to address this particular matter. And we are working together, and there'll be conversations at not only the committee level, but I think at different levels to discuss some of the considerations, including discussions with the city, TCHC, and at the board level. So it is there is a complexity to it, and there are certain impediments that do require resources and commitment and timelines and whatnot to get addressed, and it will take some time, and we do need to work together. So I'm trying to be cognizant of the sort of the complexity of it, but not over sort of state. I hope that does address. If we need to go into more details, we can always look to do it at a future time, possibly in an in-camera discussion.
Thank you, Grant. If you don't have any further questions, let us move to item number 9 on the agenda. That's combined consolidated budget 2024. Vince.
Thank you, and through the chair. As in front of you, you will see a consolidated TCHC TSHC budget. The purpose of this is to provide an update on the 2024 consolidated operating budget with TCHC. As you recall, the budget was approved on January the 4th board meeting. Since the date of the approval, more information has become available through the public, mainly through the budget committee and also through the consultation process over the last weeks. And so we have provided in there three reports. The two attachments includes the 2024 consolidated budget notes, the 2024 TCHC TSCC consolidated presentation that was presented on January 17th through the budget committee, and of course the TCHC TSHC consolidated budgets. On top of that as well, I just want to maybe just to highlight some of the key points in terms of some of the key areas. And these areas included in this case are revenue. Total revenue for the 2024 budget included $749,863,000, comprising of residential rent geared to income, market rent, and the subsidies. Along with that as well, there's accompanying $749,863,000 in terms of total expenses, an increase of about 7% overall from last year's budget. And the significant component of that in there, of course, is the one-time city subsidies that are included in the $40 million, as a additional subsidy, and on top of it, another $33.3 million as a one-time subsidy, as a one-time. And so those are the sort of the key highlights from a budgetary perspective. And from there, you will see the consolidated on attachment 3 with TCHC, TSCC in terms of total expenses for the year. I don't take any questions if there's any questions relating to this.
Yeah, Brenda.
Yeah, thank you. So as I understand it, we have an increase of 40 million and then an additional one-time 33,580,000. So that's in addition to the regular city subsidy. Am I correct on that?
Yes, through the chair. So in 2023's budget, we receive a base funding of $272 million on total revenue. So the $40 million is now the new base, 40 million on top of the 272 from prior year. So this is now a new funding base moving forward. And then on top of it, we receive an additional $33 million as a one-time subsidy, and that would only apply to 2024 only. So moving forward, our new base subsidy will be approximately 272 plus the $40 million
which would include the 40 million.
Correct.
So the 40 million is added to the base budget.
Correct.
Okay, and the 33.5 is a one-time. Now, is that truly a one-time, or is that a reflection that the budget didn't balance and they had to put in 33.5 million? I mean, why is it not just added to the 40 million? I mean, you're saying it's one time, but is it a reflection of the difference, the the inability to either raise enough funds or the expenses got out of hand? I mean, what does the 33.5 represent?
Through the chair, the $33.5 million is the expected future savings that the city and TCHC and TSCC has gone through in terms of reviewing some of the potential savings. Some of them included the water savings, some of them included efficiency savings. And so this one-time saving is a way to offset or bridge in the 2024 budget. And therefore, in the future year, 2025 and beyond, is not needed for this one time. But it is an efficiency.
So it's not a grant. So it's not a grant. It's a surplus due to efficiencies in different line items.
I guess if you can put it this way, it's a potential savings that are actually brought forward one year earlier to offset that for us to sort of balance the budget in this case here for 2024's budget.
So it's a reflection of those efficiencies. I don't call that well, maybe you call it a grant, but I don't. Okay, and these inflationary pressures that you mentioned, I'm looking at the notes here, sorry, I don't know if other people have that in front of them. You're talking here about an increase, consolidated expense increase of 7%. Yet I look at our specific budget details for Toronto Seniors Housing. And correct me if I'm wrong from my reading, it seemed like we were very efficient and we actually had some surplus in some items. So are we funding the increase costs of Toronto Community Housing? Is that money, that efficiencies on our part going to help their bottom line? You know, is how much of that 7% due to inflation and 9% due to security, for example, how much is that is our doing and how much is that mostly theirs?
Through the chair, there are two components in there that are actually significantly drive the cost for 2024. The first one, of course, is the cost and inflationary pressure,
Yeah.
mainly in the areas of maintenance component, but also on the the expected increases in wages as well to offset some of the increases from the salary pressure. So that's on the one side. The second component of it that also plays into play is the mortgage component. As you recall, the mortgage or the interest rates has shot up significantly since last year, and on the part of renewing some of these mortgages here has incurred and costed more moving forward to be able to pay for these additional the mortgages that are coming up for renewal. So it is we expect it to be a renewal aspect of it, and that certainly has caused the significant pressure. And in terms of overall operations between TCHC and TSHC, I think that we are fairly consistent overall in terms of matching and contributing to the overall effect. I think it will be false to say something in a sense to say that we're actually subsidizing the component. We're still working through on some of the allocation piece of it, which I know that is still an area needs to be done hopefully in 2024 on some of the unresolved matters. But from our perspective wise, I think, we are working diligently with TCHC to address some of these concerns and some of these issues.
I appreciate that, but I'd just like to know, as my responsibility for my organization, are we facing a 7% increase across the board? Are we facing a 9% increase across the board for community safety? I think it's important with this consolidated process, understand the politics behind that and why we have to show a consolidated budget. But I think it's important for us to know exactly what the cost pressures are for our side and how much we are contributing or not contributing, whether to cost or to revenue. So my interest here, and I appreciate it further on, you did separate some of those figures, but I think it's important for us not to miss the forest for the trees here, or miss the trees, whatever the metaphor is, because I mix them. I want to know where, either we're incurring additional costs and expenditures, and I want to know, where we're improving and where we have efficiencies, where we're saving. So that was my concern about that paragraph and the clarification. And it's not to imply that we're funding. Obviously, we're not funding Toronto Community Housing, but I think it's important for us not to blur these lines of distinction of accountability, responsibility, and who's on first, right? And I know we had to raise some of our wage rates, but I don't think it was the same extent as they had to raise theirs. So, for me, it's important to, maybe not in this document, but I want us to make certain that we understand our roles and responsibilities separate from Toronto Community Housing.
Grant?
I just wanted to help maybe briefly and Vince to sort of build on this, Brenda, to your question. I mean, when we built this budget together, it's a collaborative piece of work that's done in concert with Toronto Community Housing and the city at the table. So we're collectively working together as this budget and the consolidated view that's in front of you is presented. And although the view that's specific to Toronto seniors is not included sort of in the view that you see on this sort of in the materials, because it is a consolidated budget.
Yes, I understand that.
The allocation, for example, that Vince mentioned a minute ago is something that we work together with Toronto Community Housing on in terms of how the costs are reflected against seniors. And that's a piece of work that was established through the original setup of the arrangement between the two corporations, and we continue to work with that. So, you know, in terms of the inflationary drivers and whatnot, a number of the services that are provided to us through this arrangement with CHC, for example, Community Safety Unit, you know, we do have a reflected allocation of that based on our agreement with TCHC currently. So it would actually be something, but in terms of the the areas within the budget that we have more direct control over, you know, in terms of our operations and corporate functions, and Vince could speak to this as well, we have definitely worked through, and that's what we discussed when we brought the budget forward, looking at how we had to deal with some of the efficiencies and reduction scenarios to try and address the targets and the cost pressures and key drivers here. So we are working together on this.
Yep.
And you know, our goal is to ensure that the arrangement with TCHC in terms of the allocation is accurately done.
Well, and we've been having this discussion about the 23% charge that we have, and this has been a long-standing discussion on the board, and whether we would be reviewing that 23% split, because we thought at one point it was a little high. So my concern is in understanding all these bits are we having direct conversations about the 23% allocation we give back, and whether that any discussion about its appropriate percentage, appropriate cost, is that come to any conclusion? Are we still stuck at 23? Or are we still looking at trying to reduce it?
Yeah, I say Jill, and then Vince. Yeah.
Yes, so if I could, Tom Hunter and myself are continuing to have conversations, as well as engaging with both DCMs, Jag Sharma and Paul Raptis at the city, with regards to some of the details related to this item. So I would expect in the next couple of months, we'll have further information to share back about the status and timing.
Of what?
With regards to the discussions about the allocation and lease agreement as a whole overall subject.
Okay, so
I
that's a commitment we can have, that you'll report back to us on that.
Yes.
Please do, because we've had this conversation now for 2 years, once again, so.
Believe me when I tell you, I've been impressing that upon my friend Tom, who's well aware of it as well.
And Tom initiated some of that conversation. I know he wears a different hat now.
Absolutely.
But I don't want to lose sight of that in this glomming together of things, which is all nice and necessary, but fair is fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vince, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just quickly through the chair, we are continue to have the conversations with TCHC and the upcoming joint steering committee, and also in terms of some of the other works that we're looking to do, and certainly just to touch a bit of background on this conversation. We did raise it throughout we did in 2023's process. There's been some changes in terms of the management component of it, and I know that we want to continue further on this, but certainly both Lawrence, the chair, has been updated in terms of some of these sort of issues that we've come across. I know there are a number of them in there, and certainly we're working towards trying to get something of a conclusion moving forward. So as soon as we have more information, we will, but certainly with some of the items that we bring up, unfortunately, it's one of those things where we have quarterly meetings, and some of the quarter meetings we cannot address the entire thing, and we try to sort of have to make it small pieces and pieces to be able to resolve the bigger piece of the pie. I do agree and concur to the comment on the fact that we want to make this much faster. I think we're ready to go, but I think it's more or less is TCHC ready to come along with us?
Exactly.
That's the main conversations, and we cannot really, in some capacity, move the Goliath in some capacity here. And I think we will do our best to ensure that they come to the table and address some of the concerns that we have continually.
Yeah. May I remind everyone, Jag Sharma was the head of Toronto Community Housing, and we couldn't even get to have the joint meetings at all. And then now he's what is his title? CEO of, don't quite know his title, but now he's the head honcho for the city. And Tom is now in the position where Jag was in. So all these relationships, I understand, are fluid in position, but I think we still have to get back to the board has continually asked and for some update, and I know it's been a struggle for our staff. And I do believe it's foot dragging, and I just want to keep on reminding, let's get back to this discussion of finalizing of some of these relationships and examination of some of these financial relationships. That's all. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, staff, for your answers.
Yeah. Vince, and by the way, Brenda, our standalone numbers, the proposed budget draft ones, were included in our last board meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Vince,
Yes.
would like to go ahead, proceed with this? Or?
Yeah, I think I'm good to go. Do we want to move on to the next item? It's fine.
The presentation which was done by the CEOs, you would like to talk about it? But anyway, these items, I mean, I did watch it live, and these are available on the city's website. Okay, if you're, sorry, go ahead. Okay, so Vince, so we'll next move to financial update. That's item number 10.
Great, thank you. And through the chair, number 10 talks about the finance update. On the finance update, we have 2 items on the docket. The main one, of course, is on we've looked at in terms of preparing for the 2024 cash flow, in terms of looking at our projected cash requirement for the year. We have identified and have been working with TCHC on sort of potential shortfalls, and we continue to have the conversations with them moving forward. Most of this is really related to timing aspect and also budgeting component of it that has some implications on our cash, but we are diligently working with them, and we're setting up ongoing conversations with them to ensure that there is sufficient cash to be able to operate for the future months. And if there's anything that comes through, we will let the board committee know. And the second piece of it is on relating to the letter of guarantee, which right now we will proceed with the next step in terms of having the conversations after the budget has been passed in mid-February. We will continue with the conversations of updating on the letter of guarantee component, and just to ensure that it protects and provides some bit flexibility for TSHC. And so that will be an ongoing conversations, and then we will let update on the next committee once we have more information on these 2 items there.
Any questions on that? Brenda.
It's a question of timing. So you're saying this hasn't been finalized, but you'll report back to us? So the letter of guarantee issue and the line of credit issue, that hasn't been finalized yet. You're saying you'll come back to us?
Correct, through the chair, correct.
Okay.
So we will revive the conversation, and just to give a bit of background, in 2022, when we first approached the city, as we started in, I guess, in around September of 2022, the identification was that we will need to have a letter of guarantee with the city. And at the time, conversations had with the city financial planning department, they advised that we should work through with TCHC, sorry.
Yes.
And in that component, it was fine for 2023. However, over the last little while, we've in conversations with them, they felt that we need to go back to the city to have their second set of arrangement with them just to protect us further.
Okay.
And so the next step right now is just to have that conversations and revive that conversation. And now that we have also a new person in play in the city planning department that overlooks our account. And so we will be sort of have that conversation. And the process here is that the city, the financial planning department needs to approve the request, and then it goes to council for approval. So there's a bit of a 2-step approach first. So we will need to have that conversations first and foremost, and then they have to agree with it, and then it goes to the council for approval.
Okay.
Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I was reading the briefing note on this, I guess I was reading between the lines, but correct me if I'm wrong, Vince, but there seems to be some foot dragging or lack of enthusiasm on the part of the city to enter into the guarantee.
Yes, through the chair. That is correct. We had surfaced this probably earlier in 2023, and it's a bit of foot dragging. I would agree with that. But I think the need for us to have a line of credit with our bank is important, just as protect us. And as you recall,
Yeah,
when we did that last year, the request is to get a letter of guarantee so that we can go back to our bank to have a line of credit for $2.5 million. And that 2.5 is sort of cover our payroll for two payroll. And also for that as matter as well is a means of a last resort. So
yeah,
it's not something that we would, use flexibly, because the rate
Yeah.
of that will be very expensive to use. However, it protects us in the event that if something happens, if we don't get the advance on the monthly advances, doesn't come through at the beginning of the month, then this would basically, captures that. But certainly it is an area that we will need to revisit with the city, because TCC felt that it was important for us to deal directly with them to resolve that issue. And so hopefully with this, with the new staff and on board, we should be able to, convey the same message again, and hopefully this wouldn't be a non-issue moving forward.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just a supplemental observation that
Yeah.
insofar as we do not have this settled with the city, we're exposed to a financial risk.
Right.
And so I just urge staff to continue the good fight and get this thing resolved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
point.
It would-
And all corporations, including not-for-profits, it's recommended you have a line of credit
Oh,
up
yeah.
to a certain number of payrolls, what have you. And so it's not untoward. And
No.
I can see where the city's saying that may not need a letter of guarantee and work through your existing arrangements. But whichever way it's done, we still need that backup.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it will be a reputational issue as well if you fail
Yeah.
to meet payroll. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? If not, let us move to the item number 11. That's the couple of finance-related policies, Vince.
Thank you. And through the chair, with you in front of you, there are 3 policies going to the AFRC committee. The purpose of the report is to provide a recommendation regarding the approval of the 3 finance policies. And the 3 finance policies included the delegations of authority, the procurement delegation of authority policy, and the capital expense policy. These are attached in the 3 attachment. And just to give you a bit of context in terms of some of the workings here, the delegation of authority policy was brought up as well in January of 2023, with updates in that meeting in January of 2023. This one here updates a few additional changes, including some of the org structure changes, the title and the positions, along with eliminating some of the inactive roles that was in there in the prior year. So just making it a bit more tighter from that perspective. As well, within the policy, there is also the alignment of director's threshold as well to $100,000. As you recall, last year there were some differences between approval levels by director between corporate and operations. So one of the asks was to relook at that and streamline that and make that process. So we were able to do that and lower the directors in terms of the limit from 250 to 100,000 to keep consistency across the board, and then also adding a minimum threshold as well for the board for approval to $20,000. So those are in a nutshell the two delegation policy that is going through, and I've highlighted in there any sort of changes there in yellow are the sort of, that was from the previous version. And just a bit of context as well, the procurement delegations of authority was approved back in April of 2022. And therefore, this is just an update, from based on the new delegations of authority, that policy also needs to be updated to coincide with the new policy there. And then outside of that is the capital expense policy. Capital expense policy is a very similar and to TCHC's policy, we've updated some few minor edits and minor adjustments in there, and put into the format for our new new policy format. And on top of it, there's some few other additional in terms of outlining some transactions and clarity on existing processes. And this is assisting the audit process as well. So that goes to the board for approval. If there's any questions there, I will take the questions now.
Yeah, I see Warren's hand. Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had no problem whatsoever with the delegation of authority changes. I had difficulty reading the capital expense policy. I started out with the question when I got to the first page. Well, isn't capital expense a juxtaposition of terms? So, but I tried to get by that. I thought the policy was quite loosely worded. The fact that community housing uses it doesn't give me any comfort whatsoever. One thing that really stuck out was the fact that move out is a key term in the policy, but I haven't got the foggiest clue what move out means, and it's not a defined term. I wasn't terribly happy with this policy.
Vince, would you like to respond or?
Yes, yeah, so through the chair, I would concur and agree with Warren. It is a policy that was adopted from TCHC. I know that we've been in closely conversations with them further upon reviewing the policy, just to see if there's any further updates on the existing one. I believe the last one that they've updated was actually in 2017. So certainly it is one of the items that they're looking to review. Some terminology, some of the component in there. I would also agree with that. It's not the most commonly used form. However, because TCHC and TCSHC aligns with the cities in terms of the format and the policy, we will continue to work with TCHC to update and adopt some further changes as we go through. And we will take this note back, and certainly our goal is in the coming, in the next renewal or next update, we should be able to incorporate some additional, hopefully, languages that would clarify some of this process further. But we did have in our internal review as well that it is not a perfect policy, but it is something that we need to get on to provide. Just from a material aspect of it, there's not a lot of transactions at this point. But certainly it could be made better, and I do agree with that. And we will continue to work to get that refined moving forward.
Thank you. Brenda?
Yeah,
Yes,
just a couple of things. Is there a procurement office that reviews all contracts that are established, and someone to provide a second sober review of these contracts, make sure there's no conflict, there's no nepotism? What is the policy? And I assume this is the TCHC, policies, not ours, but is there an office, a procurement office that reviews contracts?
So through the chair, if I may add, and I don't want to put anyone in the thing, but so we have a department at TSHC that works from a procurement standpoint, and at TCHC there's also a department that works on their group. At TCHC, the group that works for essentially covers anything from an operational perspective, and our group representing anything from a corporate area. We do go through the process.
When you say corporate area, you mean what?
We mean corporate purchases relating to head office, in this case,
Okay.
the strategy, finance in the group, not necessarily operational with maintenance and what have you. So that's what we're referring to as that corporate side.
Okay.
And then on top of it, of course, we go through the process. So the directors and also the person that are responsible for going through it actually reviews the information. And also what we're trying to do is also bring this up to the committee as well more regularly to identify any purchases in areas. And for our purposes here, we do keep track, and we do have monthly, quarterly report that identify these threshold and these amounts. And on top of it, myself and Solomon, we work very closely, with the team to ensure that they comply within the policy. So
The reason I'm asking this is it kind of big. We have these, these policies you've provided to us here, and it begs the question for me about, as I read it, we have, as Toronto Seniors Housing, we have very little involvement in this because if it's capital, then that's basically Toronto Community Housing's bailiwick, right? So I look at this and I'm thinking, okay, we have all these dollar amounts, and for the board, we don't really get involved with a lot of the operational things, right? And it's quite a high threshold. I think it was, so it means we as a board are not privy to decisions and actions that are made because it's either over the dollar limit by which we would be involved. And so it begs the question for me, well, who's minding the coop here? And this comes down to risk management to some extent too. We have all these, this is a huge organization buying huge volumes of stuff. And sometimes that stuff interferes with our ability to adequately serve our senior population. So I just want to make, it just begged the question for me, who's checking, right? And given that we know now about the financial fraud that's happening and whether it's AI or computer generated, that's an additional thing, particularly the article today that Lawrence referenced. And that, what was striking about that was it was such a low level, there was no real review areas, right? So 1.1 million just goes poof, and so I don't know if there's an answer per se, but I guess calling is that I think, I don't know whether we need to recommend something or not, but I just would like to know that there's some space somewhere so that we as a board, don't get caught not knowing things or not being able to comment about the appropriateness of contracting out. Do we have open bidding? Does that go public? Is it posted so everyone in every business in the community can apply for it? I mean, are we always sticking to the same pest management people, right? Is this the time to, so I'm, it's just, I'm left feeling uncomfortable. Let's just put it that way.
Good questions, Brenda. I see Grant's hand up and then Brad. Yeah.
I just wanted to just build upon this quickly, and I know we've gone, and Vince has gone through the 3 policies, and ultimately we're looking for support to move these forward for board approval. In terms of, we have certain accountabilities and responsibilities within Toronto Seniors Housing, and then Toronto Community Housing is our partner, and we have an agreement, 2 agreements with them in terms of how we work together with them. We don't have necessarily oversight on all of their processes. However, I can, I'm confident in saying they do have policies and processes in place to look at things like conflict of interest and fraud prevention and things like that. There are open procurement processes and in a way, and in some of the delegation of authority that you're looking at today that talks about, different types of procurement processes as well. They have similar setup in terms of what the thresholds are to go for public competition and things like that. And they are at some level modeled on the City of Toronto as well. So I'm not saying that we have as much, and we do participate as well, for example, on certain procurements with them to ensure that seniors' considerations and requirements are in the requirements, for example. So there is work that we do collaboratively with them, but in terms of overall oversight, we do have, certain areas where it's not necessarily in our purview per se, although we do work with them and provide them information and input to help with vendor compliance and other things that may come up. So I just wanted to kind of add that. In the terms of the capital expense policy that Vince is presenting here today, looking for support and approval, this is modeled on Toronto Community Housing's policy. And as Vince noted, we don't have very little capital expense in Toronto seniors, but it's to ensure an alignment and understanding, because in the details how the systems work and how the controls are set up, they need to be in alignment.
Yes, I understand that. I just want to make sure the alignment is appropriate. I mean, that, we may want to go beyond, and maybe we're not able to because of our relationship with them. But these are large organizations making large budget decisions. And I just want to share with you that it's always been an issue in the Black community and other minority communities that we never get a chance at kick at the can, that we never get to the table to put in bids for various contracts within city government. Okay, and then by extension, the housing function is a city government function. And, how open is the bidding process? How widely distributed is it? These are questions that have been raised in any number of equity discussions and tables and never gets acted on because it's always the same old, right? So I'm just red flagging that. It may not be within our control, but when we follow things in alignment, well, maybe we need to re-examine, maybe think, is there a possibility for us to be better or go different? They're just enormous sums here. And I just want to make sure that in fairness to public accountability and public chance, I know with federal situations, they have to post all contracts online so you can go on their system. It's not the openest, not the most open system. Trust me, it's not perfect. But this is a continuing discussion in business, in the Black community, Black professional community, and likewise by extension other communities. And I just think we need to be, just be a little more open in examining all these assumptions we have on who we do business with.
Yeah, Brad, would you like to add, and then Solomon probably?
No, I thank you through the chair. Thanks, Lawrence. I mean, Solomon is our procurement manager within
All right.
Toronto Seniors Housing. He's here today to support Vince on these items. So it looks like Solomon has something to add on this. So.
Yes, Solomon.
Chair, I would just like to address some of the questions that I heard. So we at Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, we do have a procurement policy, procedures, and protocols. We do procure any value up to 100,000, and all our procurements are posted on a public bid platform, namely Bonfire. We follow the procurement DOA to make sure that we have the appropriate roles signed in off on our spend, signed in our contracts, and any change orders. We have an open and fair competition in terms of system. So the procurement management function at Toronto Senior Housing, we comply with our policy and all government legislation such as CEFTA, that's the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and all of the different agreements. So I'm the person who makes sure that the business units and the organization adhere to our procurement policy, procedures, and protocols.
And you said up to 100,000? I didn't hear. You said
Yes.
to the figure of 100,000. What happens up?
So if it's beyond 100,000, the shared service agreement that we have with TCHC stipulate that we work with TCHC to procure any contract or opportunity over 100,000 on our behalf. And we also do joint procurements with them.
And you say they're posted on what site was it?
Bonfire.
Bonfire.
Yes.
Who administers that site?
It's administered by TCHC, and it is used by both entities, TCHC and TSHC.
Okay. And how widely distributed? So that's a static thing. They post it on the site. But is there any effort to do outreach to ensure that people have access and knowledge about it? I've
Yes.
never ever heard of it, by the way. So just to
It has the outreach is significant because most of the vendor community are registered on Bonfire. So when we post anything publicly, we do get a lot of traction in terms of bids.
So do you contact people, business organizations in the diverse ethnic, racial, cultural community so that their members and their professional members can be in a position to bid? Because if you're communicating with the same set of people, then you get the same set of results, right?
And that's
and-
true. So what I do basically, I solicit different vendors because even though we post on Bonfire, there are times when I will go out and send out a notice that, look, you can download this opportunity from Bonfire. And I've worked with Grant and his team on several projects where I go above just to reach out to the vendor community other than who have access to Bonfire.
Yes. Good, I appreciate that, and I can be of any assistance to give you names of organizations. I'm happy to do so, because this is a continuing issue. I mean, this has been a 30-year discussion I've had for years, in various efforts I did in diversity, and it comes back to the same old thing of who's at the table.
I would
Okay.
certainly welcome that.
Yeah, all right. I'm happy to see that you're on our team. Thank you so much for that information.
Grant.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
Marcia, Chair. So I just, we've had, I think, a good discussion. I know we got into more of the procurement policy zone there with that last discussion, but I just wanted to see if we could bring it back to the three policies that are in front of the committee and ask if there's any further questions for Vince potentially.
Yeah.
And if there's an action on policy around the procurement space, we can certainly look at that as a follow-up.
Yeah. I have a few questions for Vince. Vince, Appendix 2. If you have a look at it, the second column, yellow highlighted, it says CEO, finance lead, and director, strategy and business management. This limit is singly or jointly for them? All three together or?
So through the chair, this is a joint amount. So typically myself, Grant, and also Jill will need to sign off on any of the item there. Do you have the specific page number? Is attachment number 2, right? Is it on the director word or on the?
On your, after your page, delegation authority, your briefing note, page 3 of 3, then Appendix 1, Appendix 2, it says TSCH operations, pending authority limits for requisitions, contracts, commitments, and other financial transactions for the TSHC operations team. Budgeted authority to approve the requisition and sign contract, single signature on a contract. Okay.
Yeah, I see.
It says single signature, unbudgeted single signature on a contract. So individually, singly, you can sign each of you up to 500K. Okay.
Yeah, so this is collectively, sorry, through the chair, and yeah, so I see it now. So that is collectively, us three will need to review it. And so for most of the documents that pertains to this area here, I would say that we haven't got anything that came through. And if we would, you would have seen it in the last meeting, which we brought up any of the major changes. If you recall, on the procurement side, there were, I think, only 2 amount over, and both of them with TCHC. But typically in any of the agreements there, this would mean that the CEO, the finance lead, and the director of strategy and business and management will need to sign off on this particular one there.
Yeah, thank you. And then moving to Appendix 6, check signing and electronic funds transfer. All the checks, are they system generated? I mean, it's printed through the banking system and the.
Yeah, so correct, and through the chair, yeah, the Appendix 6, all the checks and EFT are made through the system.
And there are no manual checks, no manual signing of checks at all.
Correct. Through the
Okay.
chair, correct, yes.
And this stationery is provided by the bank, pre-printed stationery, right? Right. Okay. Um, and who does the bank reconciliation? What kind of a, oversight is there on bank reconciliation on this?
So through the chair, we do have an account staff accountant that actually reconciles us, and I review them on a monthly basis. So at the end of each month, we would go through any of the transactions and any of the items relating to check disbursements in EFT. And so, I mean, right now, I would say report wise, I mean, there's not a lot of checks, and certainly we will review for any sort of fraudulent activities that comes through, and we know there could be a few things that cut through, and we review the banks regularly as well. And myself and the accountant as well review this on for myself anyway, at least once or twice a week, just to ensure that the
Okay.
information is accurate and there's no issues with any sort of withdrawal that might be non-compliant.
Yeah, good. The continuous monitoring is always helps in these times.
Yeah.
And does our corporation have any petty cash? Good old days, we used to have petty cash,
Yes.
impress system, and do we have it?
So through the chair, currently we do have petty cash. The petty cash are distributed through the 4 regions and also through the SSA. The amount is nominal. It's about $500 in each of those regions. And so, and for them to replenish, or for them to issue that, they have to go through specific requirements as it relates to the petty cash policy in terms of what qualifies for reimbursement type of thing. And once it is submitted, we also go through it, finance, review it to ensure that these are adequate copies and backup and support for the expenses and advise if there's anything there. So from our perspective, it's a small there. It's about 500 in each of the 4 regions.
Yeah, fine. Thanks for that. Moving to Appendix 7, it's on journal entries.
Mm.
And it talks about miscellaneous journal entries. Okay, if you can give me just a few examples, what exactly, because the limit is 2 million and up to 2 million, over 2 million. What kind of journal entries are these?
Well, through the chair, I would say that we hardly have any of these types of entries in terms of, but anything with miscellaneous would fall outside of anything that in this case, your insurance, lease, hydro revenue and such. So we don't anticipate there's anything, with respect to the service delivery agreement. That might be an item there, but typically that is through the PO process. So there's not a journal entry related. So is as a pre-authorized. So we don't anticipate that there's anything relating to any sort of miscellaneous journal entries that would have, come through on our side. But certainly we put it there as an item to replicate some of the entries that are done through our sister company, CHC as well.
Okay. And you're talking about recurring JVs. Now, just if you can give me an example, what could be those recurring JVs or journal entries?
Yeah, I mean, recurring entries would be something like audit fees that we reoccur monthly. We accrue that as a monthly is for an X dollar amount each month. So it's a very limited and very small in amount, but there's nothing sort of significant from our perspective wise. Certainly, like I said, if there are other entries that come through as reoccurring, the other ones would be payroll, right? Payroll, those are the amount, not necessarily the same amount, but it's a recurring process every month where there's 2 entries that have been posted, but it is much lower in terms of the threshold. And so therefore it's I would consider those to be in that bucket.
Yeah. Normally, if you've got deferred revenue, you've got prepaid expenses, those recurring journal entries happen. Now, are they set up through the system, your ERD system, or they're manually done?
Well, for any reoccurring entries through the chair, it's an actual, you have to enter into the system and then someone has to post it, of course. Myself would have to go through it and ensure that the entry is correct. And then we as a team review this on a monthly basis, just through the financial, and identify any sort of variances versus our budget as well. So there is two process. One is the approval process. The second is the reviewing process of it. Post that we, identify that within our team to identify if of any sort of variance or any major issues there.
Yeah. Are there any reversing entries? Some software allow you to do reversing entries, especially for accruals, provisions, and automatically they reverse the next period. Do you have that kind of provision in the system?
Yes, so through the chair, there is a sort of like a solid check mark in the system that you can identify as reversal for the following period. And so there is a process in there, and it is essentially we review these entries because again, on a monthly basis, we would also go through the balance sheet accounts as well, and also the expense to ensure that there is, any incorrect reversal if needed. So certainly we identify that and review that on a monthly basis to ensure that the information is correct.
Okay, thank you. Any idea what kind of a percentage of journal entries auditors annual audit, they examine? 10% or what kind of sample they use, at least last year?
Yeah, so through the chair, that's a good question. I mean, it's I cannot give you an exact figure or amount,
Okay.
but we will be coming up in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks time, going through the audit process with them. And so typically they would identify, like based on the last year's, they would review some of the entries relating to the deferred revenue, and also the service delivery agreement as a recurring entries. And then on top of it, there might be reviewing of some of the payroll related entries. So to give you a specific percentage or amount that they go through, probably I won't be able to answer that,
Okay.
but certainly
No problem.
yeah.
It's okay. Probably we can ask the auditors next time, or it could be in their audit report. I saw Jill Sand, then Grant. Jill or Grant who would like to answer?
I'll let Grant go ahead.
Thank you, Lawrence. So through the chair, Lawrence, I just wanted to say I know you're getting into some detailed questions here. If you'd like us to set up a follow-up meeting with you to go through some of this, we certainly would be open to doing that as well. And if that would help suffice with some of these items.
Okay. And then coming to the capital expenditure policy, having a policy is fine, and we don't have much of a capital expenditure, but ultimately it should be, aligned with our accounting standards, public sector accounting standards. You might have read a couple of months back, one of the largest banks, Canadian bank, they had wonderful policies for 12 years. They're capitalizing expenses that were not supposed to be done. And they had some wonderful auditors, audit fees, 50 million per annum, but 12 years nobody noticed it. And SEC in USA observed that, and then they penalized that bank 6 millions. And then we woke up, our regulators penalized 4 millions. What they're doing is internally developed software being capitalized for 12 years. And then they found it was not in line with IFRS. So just to make sure, I mean, we don't have right now, but at least they are in line with the whatever accounting standards, public sector accounting standards, and IFRS, they are in line with that. That is it. That's my questions. If there are no, are there any other questions? I see the counselor, Fareed. No questions? Okay. In that case, probably we can move to the last item. That's the, so rather we need an approval for these.
Yeah, you have to make a recommendation to the board.
Yeah, okay. We need a motion to approve these policies for the board to approve in the next board meeting. I need need someone to move. Fareed moved, and I need by Councillor Krisanthi. Okay, that carried. And then we'll adjourn now. So I need if there are no any further questions. Oh, Brenda, you have a question.
I have a question, and it may not be answerable here. When reading through all the materials here, I was struck by the fact that I saw no minimal mention of any construction or new housing units coming on board. There were some revitalization projects of TCHC. I didn't see any that related to seniors on that list. One thing is one question: are we allowed as Toronto Seniors Housing, going forward in the future, if we wanted to expand and have more housing units, are we able to do that, or is it all done through TCHC? Because it's capital and all that. I don't know if that's a simple
Brad
answer or
and
not.
then Jill.
I'll let Jill go first.
Jill.
And so through the chair, thanks for the question, Brenda. So you're correct. Capital and all the planning for future development does happen through TCHC, through the real estate team. And so any existing discussions or future discussions about expanding the number of seniors buildings would have to be entered into through TCHC and through the real estate team. And then if they were to proceed, would navigate through the board, through their board and back to ours. My understanding is, and Brad or Grant can correct me, in 2024, there are no plans for any new additional seniors buildings in the plan.
And related to that question is the issue of, well, at what point, whether it's TCHC or ourselves, at what point do we start discussing building new housing? There's all the various federal funds and new programs, and I don't know if we're eligible for any of those. But I feel like we're kind of missing the boat here, that there's a whole expansion of housing, co-op housing, private public sponsorships. There's different models, right? But I'm just concerned that we can't just have a steady state. I mean, we obviously, in my humble opinion, have to grow because the needs are growing. We are also an aging city. So where in this discussion, and as I say, I'm quite happy, it may not be a simple answer for another time, but where in this discussion of budget is a discussion of growth and expansion and additional housing units? And I don't see it in this budget process. I just see them mention some of the revitalization projects, which have gone on for years,
Yeah.
I mean, Alexander Park, Regent Park, I mean, I remember when those places were built, so that's how old I am.
So if I could, all the discussions about net new housing comes through Housing Secretariat, through the Development and Growth Division at the city.
Okay.
Which is led by Jag Sharma. So I would say, if we want to enter into any, future discussions about growth or expansion of the 83 buildings we already have, then we would need to get into that conversation with the city as well as with TCHC jointly. I think at this stage, based on the more recent arrangement through the province, that the Housing Secretariat and Development and Growth Division are getting into the details of how that money will be allocated across the housing spectrum already. So it may be that at some point in this year that we need to start planning a discussion with TCHC about the seniors portfolio particularly. And I would suggest that this item come back more holistically to this committee and to the board actually, as a bigger conversation if the board feels that's appropriate.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think it does deserve it, because we're seeing increasing levels of course, seniors poverty, and in particular female, it's gendered. And like at what point we just can't hold steady with what we have. I mean, we have to start, whether we can, I'm not suggesting tomorrow, obviously we can't do it tomorrow, but it seems it's an opportune time when there's a real consciousness of the need for expansion of housing options. Where are we at the table? And if we're not at the table, is there some way we can be? So I look forward to further discussions, and maybe it come back to the board.
Brad?
Yeah, through the chair. So the next, we are part of those revitalizations. So the Alexandra Park has a 257 unit seniors building contained within it. And we received tens of millions of dollars to retrofit that building and to improve the building's efficiency and improve the living conditions for our residents. The next revitalization we'll be involved in will be the Flemington Lawrence Heights revitalization. And part of that will be the demolition of 8 low-rise seniors buildings, 127 units, and it'll be replaced with a high-rise. That's in the design and engineering.
High-rise for seniors.
For seniors, a dedicated.
Okay.
So we are involved in the revitalization, and from the Lawrence Heights revitalization, we will be receiving additional seniors units.
But those are not new units; those are just revitalizing existing units.
We'll be demolishing 127 seniors units.
Sorry, I can't hear you, dear.
Sorry. The demolition will be of 127 seniors units. Yeah. It's going to be replaced with over 200 seniors units on the site.
Okay, so a modest increase.
Modest, yes.
Okay, so I appreciate that, but I just think we need to do more. and expand a little bit beyond that, other than revitalization.
Vince, I saw your hand up, and then Councillor.
Yes, and through the chair, through the presentation and what Jill added earlier, with respect to the anything to do with planning from that perspective, that goes through, to TCHC, and certainly there are significant amount being planned in the next 10 years, and so I think the next conversations will be, that Jill and the team will have in terms of where that some of the new development but also new expansion will take place. We do appreciate the fact that right now we are not in a lease agreement. We don't have anything in play
Exactly.
Significant for us to do anything
Exactly.
at this point. So we are just basically, ready in a sense until the portfolios shift over to TTSHC, sorry. But at this point, there's not a lot that we could do further, and a lot of that conversation rests with TCHC at this point.
So 2
Thanks,
points
Vince.
there.
Okay.
2 points there. That's exactly why I want this service agreement situation resolved, because I knew this was going to happen, right? Number one. And number two, I think we need to go beyond just deferring to TCHC. I think either we need to have a creative discussion, creative way of thinking of expansion. We could be partnering with different city departments. We could be partnering with community. So I just think I'd like to bring that discussion to the board and with staff support and see where we can have an impact and a role.
Thank you. Councillor Crisanti?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. So if you can hear through my voice, January for me is officially under the weather month. So I keep getting something, but it's been a rough month for me this month. But anyway, Brenda again raises a really good point. I think we need to do more when it comes to ensuring that we look forward to being an aging city, and that more housing for seniors is in fact created. One way of doing that is to, because I know that as city councilor up here in Etobicoke North, I get developers come to me all the time, and not just for developing up in my area, but developing across the city, because they're looking for support, they're looking for suggestions. In fact, many are looking for ideas, and they ask me, well, what do you think we should do on this site, councilor? I'm reminding them that we should always be looking at a couple of additional components: affordable housing and also housing for seniors. So depending on the size of the site, there are sites that could accommodate a good, diverse community and needs, and accommodate the needs of the city and the needs of our aging population as well. So I think more can be done through those channels. And I'm happy at my end to continue to advocate that way through my contacts and people. But I would like to also encourage the mayor and other councillors across to do the same. And I think we could get a lot more housing done by simply, and developers are friendly people for the most part. They want to invest, they want to develop, they many times look for guidance as to what the best type of development could be on a particular site. So that's just a suggestion that maybe we could work towards as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Jill?
Thank you. And maybe I'll just round this up this way. So I think in a future meeting, we can bring back a couple of things. One is the overview of the revitalization plans included in the 2024 budget. An overview, and discussion about net new potential seniors housing. And that again is a discussion guided by our partnership with TCHC and the city. And I'd also like to just highlight, and many of you may realize this, in 2021, councillors that were part of the TCHC board did make a motion, and it passed, to switch a family building to senior status. It was 77 Rankin, because 80% of that population was seniors. So again, not new, but again, we do know that there's a large population of seniors living in family buildings. So it's kind of shuffling the deck chairs a little bit, but there is that discussion as well about the buildings that have seniors residing in them across the city as well. So I think overall, the discussion about the growing aging population and the discussion about new construction as well as rehabilitation or revitalization projects in the 24 budget is something that we'll take away as staff and bring it back to a future meeting.
Thank you, Jill. If there are no any further questions, it's time for us for adjournment. I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Warren and seconded by Councillor Crisanti. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for your time today and all the contribution today. It was a really interesting discussion. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.